Okay, just so everybody knows, we are live on YouTube.
Okay, and I see Garish, Kevin, Brian, Bob, and myself. So we are good with a quorum to kick off. It's 4:02, so I will call this meeting to order.
Sorry.
No?
There we go. No, sorry, my starts and then it plays. It plays, so I was just getting a big echo, so go ahead.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I am dealing with a little CPU issue in the background. Super fun. Okay, so before we let everyone in from the waiting room for citizens to be heard, just wanted to again set the stage for the commission for what we want to try and accomplish today. And I think, Mila, we decided we couldn't break into a workshop, so this will remain open. Okay, cool. So after our standard items, I know that we have the two things at the end today as discussion items, but just wanted to, those, we're going to try and keep those to a tight-ish time schedule, really with the goal of scoping the work that needs to be done and setting a plan that then we can plot out for the next couple meetings. If there's anybody on YouTube who would like to make a comment about anything that's not on the agenda, or would like to make a comment about things that are in the arena of the items that are listed as discussion items in the packet, you're welcome to join and make a comment during citizens to be heard. And that way we'll avoid any confusion, because we had some confusion on our last meeting. So Mila, let's do this. Let's let everybody in. We'll go through. Yeah, let's go ahead and just let everyone in. We'll have citizens to be heard and then move on. It's weird with the delay.
Okay, they're in. And then it looks like Brian is still connecting to audio. I don't know if we want to make sure he can speak.
Brian, can you hear us?
Or maybe he'll need to call in.
Brian, can you text in the chat if you can hear us? Do we want to try and boot him out of the meeting and see if he'll rejoin, and that might help? I was having issues with Zoom earlier today at work, so.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll see.
Looks like he might be connected.
Okay.
Let's see. Brian, can you unmute and make sure that we can hear you and that you can hear us?
I am here. I was just on the phone with a client, and so that's why I didn't connect. So I think we're good.
No worries. All right. So thank you for everyone who joined for citizens to be heard. We had a little bit of confusion during our last meeting for a discussion item, and if there would be opportunity to comment on the discussion items during the meeting. Because those are not public hearings, we won't be having citizen discussion during those discussion items. So if you have a comment on something that's not on the agenda, or if you would like to make a comment related to the topics of discussion that we have set for later in our agenda, you're welcome to do that. I see a couple people. So Mila, would you, I don't see the order they join. I don't know if you can view it that way.
It was the same pretty much.
Okay, so Michael, I see you at the above reads. So if you would like to come off of mute and if you have a comment to make, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, this is Michael Scarda with Namaste Rock. I am just looking at the changes today. I'm interested in joining the committee that plans the 190-1313, and also a transportation. I understand there's a transportation thing going on. So if there's information on joining those, I'm interested.
The transportation group is not related to the Planning Commission. And Mila, I don't know how involved your office is with that, but maybe you could quickly speak on that.
Sure, we are definitely involved. However, at the moment, I believe there are mostly just staff meetings happening. There will be a chance for public participation, and you can just keep an eye out for that. We can make sure to notice when there are public meetings, but for right now, it's mostly county and staff.
Thank you, Michael. Reed, did you have a comment to make, or are you here just to listen?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, more to listen. You know, there was a few comments made to my development on last Tuesday. So I just was kind of curious on, you know, in November, it seemed like a majority consensus with the Planning Commission that campground overnight accommodations were okay in that area. So I'm kind of curious to see how that is. And also, how exactly any development that's up there that gets, you know, put in the plan, is there, like, how does that get screened? Because any development that goes in there is going to have some kind of visual effect. And so I'm just kind of curious to see how all that is incorporated. I know there was comments on my development about its visual impact, but there's been, you know, nobody giving feedback on how do you actually create a development in open space and visually mitigate, you know, its visibility. So I'm just curious on the discussion.
Great, thank you for your comments. And Mark, I see that you've joined. Did you want to make a comment, or are you here to listen?
Greetings. Thank you for inviting me in. I think I've pretty much said, you know, what I meant to say several times to several groups regarding the OAO being applied to bed and breakfast. And I'm here to hear what you have to say about that, and hopefully that'll take place. I know overnight rentals such as the one next door, or Rim Village type things, condominiums that are rent for Airbnb, they're unsupervised. That's not the type of bed and breakfast. I don't know if they have a bed and breakfast license. I'm talking about bed and breakfasts that have that are owner occupied and managed. I must say a formula that I thought might be appropriate for bed and breakfast would be that any home could rent as many rooms as are occupied in a home. That number of rooms perhaps could be rentable as overnight. That I don't know what else I can say. I'm just hoping to hear a good conversation on the matter, and that it'll be brought forward in the future. Good luck to us all. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Mark. I believe that is everybody I see in the room who isn't part of the commission staff or Jaylyn. So we'll go ahead and move on. To the planning commissioners, I guess we don't really have any hearings item, but is there any ex parte communication or conflicts of interest that anyone would like to report?
Emily, before we move on, can we just ask that the people here to listen can listen on YouTube? And then if they need to come back for any reason to sign back into the meeting, just because we are broadcasting this. And so I think it can be a little confusing if we have a lot of different names in this screen.
I think that's a great point, especially since we'll be having a discussion. So if you are currently signed into this call is being live broadcast to YouTube. If you wouldn't mind dropping off of the Zoom call and joining to view on YouTube, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you. That's a great call out.
You asked for ex parte communications. This might not count, but after the Strawberry thing left the Planning Commission, I had a conversation with Kaylin Jones about my impressions. So, but that was when it was out of our hands. So, I want to disclose.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to minutes from May 26, 2020. I watched the county council meeting and I really liked how efficient Mary was with dealing with the minutes. So I am going to go ahead and assume that everyone here has had a chance to read the minutes by the time we get to this meeting. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask for a motion for the minutes. Kevin?
I move that we approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Second.
Third.
Okay. Is there any discussion? All right. Let's see here.
Yes, I've just got one question. Under future considerations, it says the letter sent from the Planning Commission regarding the direction. What was the timing of that? Was that letter sent prior to the meeting that these minutes are applicable to, or after?
It was sent prior to the meeting, but we brought it up to make sure that everybody knew that it was on the agenda for the June 2nd County Council meeting during future discussions.
Okay, so the letter was sent to the council prior to our meeting when we discussed. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I don't remember the exact date, but it was sent the week before.
Thank you.
All right, so Bob and Garish, I can't see your faces, so I'm gonna need audible yays from you. So Kevin has made a motion to forward the minutes in our packet. All in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so I mentioned at the top, Mila was so wonderful and talked with me, spent quite a bit of time this week chatting about how we wanted to break down some of the open questions that have been coming up during previous meetings, and specifically to address the requests from the County Council to come back with a scope and time frame for being able to do a small area plan for that 191-313 intersection. So I sent out my notes from the County Council meeting, which I believe are on our packet, page 6 of the digital packet. Generally speaking, the conversation at the County Council meeting last week was in favor of doing this plan. Councilman Clapper specifically raised the question of timing and said that that was a concern of his and that he would like to see this done by the end of the year. If it's something, he would like it to be a priority, but he'd like to see it done by the end of the year so that we can work with a reasonable time frame to be able to come back with recommendations to the council. Now, we know that for all sorts of reasons, certainly lack of budget, the fact that staff has already been taking on so much work, we're going to have limited resources to support us in being able to do this. And we know that this is a project that's going to require community participation. We also don't know how much of that participation we'll be able to do in person. So I thought it would be useful to begin our conversation today by one, trying to come up with the topics, not even necessarily specific questions, but topics we might want to survey the public on. A survey is a digital, non-in-person and cheap way to be able to get a sense for this specific area. What is the interest? What are the specific concerns, if there are any? Are they broad? Are they narrow? Can that help us understand areas we might want to focus on to help us be more efficient with our time? And just to open up this as a conversation with the community versus a conversation direct to council. And then Mila, I wasn't sure where we left it. I'm sorry, my head's a little bit scrambled, but I think you were going to give some thought maybe to timing. So I'd love to just kick it over to you and let you kind of share your thoughts about this before we go into any deeper conversation.
Yeah. So I discussed things with Zachariah and then looked at some other small area plans. And I think, some general background and things to think about for the Planning Commission as we undertake that process are a few. So one is timing for sure. And I think it would probably be good at this meeting if we can try and get ourselves a schedule. So, if we set a target of when we want to get a plan adopted, and then work back from there. When's the public hearing, and then when do we want to have a draft, and then when do we want to have, the public engagement times. I think that would be a really useful item if we can work on that. And then another piece is we probably need to start out by defining the geographic boundaries of this small area plan. So that's another piece. And then after that, for staff, it would be really helpful if we get an idea of, what exactly we think we want to have in the plan in terms of, we need a vision, we need goals, probably concrete goals. Do you want to, and then what areas do you want to focus on as far as the actual meat of the plan in terms of, visual impact or water, capacity, use table, where are we focusing our ideas, and what do you want the plan to hold? Do you want there to be design guidelines? Are we mostly use standards? What is all that based on? And then, eventually we'll get into more of the nitty gritty as far as, how much text we want this plan to contain, how many visuals do we need to have, some illustrations or, examples or things like that. And then so that's sort of the actual plan itself, the physical document. Then the last part is speaking to Emily's comments about staff time, which are very valid. We have a lull this week, and then I think we actually have 6 action items scheduled for next week. So this lull is not indicative of an actual downturn in applications. It's just a timing issue. So, if there is an interest from planning commissioners as far as being a little bit more active on the public engagement front, staff would love to know, how much interest, if there is any, and how you see that going. Because, like you said, there's not necessarily going to be a physical space where we can meet with people. But one suggestion Zacharias I had was that, we could potentially maybe in the fall or late summer organize like an outdoor open house at Bar M or something like that. Masks on, etc. And then in the meantime, I think it will largely be digital efforts. And there is certainly room for planning commissioners to participate in some of that time if you want to. And it would be very helpful for us to know, if there's on that front as well. So, we have timing, we have the actual content of the plan, the way that it looks, and then, what our staff, basically staff and planning capacity is moving forward, which may also inform timing. So those two go together.
That's great. So what I recommend we spend the next 30 or so minutes on is tackling some of these big questions, not trying to solve for them or get to any specifics, but just to get a bucket of stuff that we can then sort through and say, okay, we know we're going to need to address this bucket of stuff, these questions. Let's plan that for next meeting, or we are going to need to do a survey to answer some of these questions, and so on and so forth. And why don't we start by just talking about that geographical boundary question, because this is something that could be a very, very large overlay or plan, or it could be more targeted. So Mila, is there any chance you have the parcel map for the county available that you could share your screen, just
Sure.
so that we can kind of look at if there are natural boundaries that align to large parcel boundaries?
Yeah, let's pull that up real quick.
And also just to say, it's really hard to do open discussions digitally. So I think we just do this popcorn style, so feel free to, any of us just jump in and we'll go from there.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So we are generally talking about here. And just tell me if you want me to zoom in or out. This is sort of the bird's eye view. So,
But my recollection is that the parcels up along 191 are not in this, not all of them are in this data layer. Like, it's not really showing us where all the private land is at the moment.
It just loaded, so you can see
Okay,
the
now
new
it's-
boundaries there. It
And
takes.
then in addition, there's SITLA parcels, which could become private at any time.
Mhm.
So I just kind of wonder whether we should say, you know, it's from the Arches entrance to 1 mile south of Crescent Junction or something like that. You know, within half a mile of the highway.
And Mila, can you scroll out so that we can at least see the other private lands extending up to the airport and down to the resort commercial zone?
Sure, it might get a little awkward,
Yeah, it might be.
but
You know, I've got another map which might show that more clearly if I can share my screen.
here, let me, there's the other Grand County parcel map. I'm gonna look at that real quick and see if that's more helpful for us. Okay, Kevin, yeah, this one isn't coming up either. Do you want to share yours, Kevin? I'll stop sharing mine.
Okay, I will give it a try. I'm allowed to share. I get a message that says host disabled, so you have to make me a co-host and then I would be able to share.
Or I can just do all participants can share. Okay, you
That
should be
would
good
also
now.
work. Okay, can you guys see something?
Yeah.
Okay, so like here's the river bridge. You can see my cursor. And then Park and Federal up to about here. And then this is starting that, you know, the 313 area, which Mila pointed out. There's a mixture of SITLA and state sovereign lands around there. And this private thing a little further north. I think this is the airport. And then a big block of SITLA land closer to Crescent Junction with a little bit of overlap here.
So it seems to me, I know you said a mile south of Crescent Junction, but it seems like from the Arches entry to, or even a mile above the Arches entry to the airport might seem like a more natural area for this particular junction, since Crescent Junction itself might eventually, you know, or a Thompson specific plan, which may or may not include Crescent Junction, seems like it's a slightly different, there's a different nature to it. So
yeah, I agree that kind of makes sense. I guess my idea is if development were to start around there, do we want it to just be generic, or it falls within this plan and it could be split off later? But I think, you know, it could also be added to this plan later. So that what you say also sounds reasonable to me.
just given the fact that we are constrained to, you know, a 6-month timeline or so to do this, it seems like being a little bit more targeted, knowing that the findings and learnings from this will likely be reproducible to plans that are more of that like 191 I-70 intersection. Should we take that one up as well in the future?
I also want to mention, we might not want to do this, but the other things that come to mind is being sort of similar to this, in that it's an area outlying, you know, further from town, but where there is private land and potential for development. There's this area along Cane Creek right now, some of which is currently zoned highway commercial, which doesn't seem so appropriate. And then the various parcels up along 128. And I kind of wonder if, even if we're spending most of our time focusing on the area that Emily just described, there might be a few provisions that it would make sense to apply to Cane Creek Boulevard and 128 as well.
Garish, Brian, Bob, do you have thoughts or opinions about geographic boundaries for this that are different from what's been discussed?
I would say I like kind of the probably airport down kind of as an area just to look at. Haven't thought much about Cane Creek or 128, but maybe as we're starting discussion of the airport on down toward us, there'll be some things at 128 and Cane Creek might be easy to mention for. I haven't really thought about it. But I do think probably going all the way to Crescent Junction may be further than we want to go at this point.
Yeah, since there isn't a lot of interest in going, up near Crescent Junction, I don't know how high a priority that would be. But I think if we're going to talk about a corridor plan, we could make it a very small area plan and just cover 313 or the 313 area, or extend it all the way to Crescent Junction. So I'm kind of torn between the two ideas, but at a minimum, I think it should go from the private land and settler land immediately adjacent to Highway 191 and Highway 313 and extend up to the airport.
Any questions as far as how far to the southwest we look as well? Kevin, do you mind panning over a little bit there?
I would say everything within the view shed, or maybe, we can measure the distance from 191 to the edge of the settler parcels adjacent to Arches National Park boundary. But mostly we're interested in, I think it was characterized at the council meeting as kind of the gateway to Moab. So anything that would affect the gateway characteristics should be included.
That's great.
This is Brian. I like the idea from the airport to Arches, and then just a mile or so west of the 313 191 interchange. But I know like in highway commercial in San Juan County, it's 1,000 foot off the center point of the highway, and maybe we could do a half mile or a certain distance from, so that we covered all the airport and that big block of land right there by 313.
Mila, I'd love to get staff's opinion just from what's been discussed so far. I hear some general consensus along 191, bridge to or Arches to airport. So Brian, I think your recommendation there of picking a set distance off the center point in either direction, and perhaps going, center point all the way to Arches on the east regardless makes sense. So I think that seems like a pretty obvious boundary to the east. To the west, perhaps it's that half mile, or perhaps it's equitable to whatever is sent to the east. We'll also would love just Kevin's comment around Cane Creek and the River Road. Are there, pieces of that you think would be relevant to look at this, or is that going to start to balloon beyond what we can attain? Is it better just to kind of cut it off and address it separately?
Yeah, so I think that in answer to your first question, I think that it would be better to keep Cane Creek separate. And that is mostly because, as we mentioned, this is sort of the gateway to Moab, and Cane Creek isn't entirely in the same category. I think it would be great to talk about development of that way as well. But for the purposes of this small area focused plan, I think we should probably keep it to this corridor. I think Arches to airport sounds great. I don't know if we want to go a little bit south of there. I know that it may be helpful to include the site that will eventually be part of the county. So I don't know if we want to maybe go all the way down to where we have development already. That would, in my opinion, that is all the gateway to Moab as well. And I do think that from my perspective, I think the airport is a good place to stop for this particular plan. It seems like kind of the edge of what's already happening, and north of there, we don't have a ton of private land anyway. So I think that's wise. The only other thing I would mention is that there have been a number of inquiries for developments up 7 Mile Canyon. So as far as our width, we should keep that in mind. And if you want to be including those properties as well. Intrepid Potash owns quite a bit of land out there. So, and they are.
Which part of 7 Mile is lower around here or further
yes.
up?
Yeah, the lower part, but they own, yeah, and maybe that's all theirs right there, but I think they might own a little bit further up too. I don't know if that's the whole parcel map, and I know that they are, you know, they have been in negotiation selling it to various parties that, you know, that they've been talking to. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're discussing width.
So one possibility then is just, I mean, we could just draw it along parcel boundaries, you know, so the private land we see here, the SITLA parcels, even though we're not going to be too concerned about the stuff that's, you know, more than a mile from the highway, which is unlikely to develop anyway. And then optionally, I mean, because I think, and then all this federal land around here, I don't know that it makes sense for us to draw our boundaries, including that, because it's very likely to become private and be developed. Very unlikely, excuse me.
Oh, Garish, I saw you waving.
Yeah, as far as the underside, I think there's probably still a fairly active committee that's sort of visioning what will happen there. And that would probably result in its own small area plan. So I don't think including the underside is that important at this point in time. I think the zoning that was established for what's it called, Moab at night, or the projects immediately north of the bridge. I think that was
Canyonlands by night.
Canyonlands by night. Thank you. I think that zone was specifically intentioned to perhaps encompass all of that private land on both sides of the bridge. Even though part of it is probably not zoned. Is that resort commercial?
Yes.
But I think the intention of that zone was to incorporate the resort commercial on both sides of the bridge there. So my way of thinking is we just start at the parcels adjacent to 191 and 313 as we've described the boundaries, and go to the airport and not worry about any parcels closer to town. Just to focus the geographical area to something that's maybe a little easier to bite and doesn't have quite the complications of existing zones and proposed zones and that sort of thing.
I agree with that. And I think that it's a cleaner approach and allows us to be very targeted and focused on the area that we're looking at, which the characteristics there, you know, are different from the characteristics down closer to town by the bridge. So I'd love to wrap up this part of the conversation and move on to talking about what we might want to look into. So my recommendation was that we try to start with a survey, but of course that can mean any number of things. So are there specific priorities from what we have heard so far in citizen comment, in conversation related to the OAO planning process, and from, you know, other comments that have been made related to different proposals that have come before us? What comes to mind that we know needs to be addressed, that we'll need citizen comment on? What are the specific priorities that we have? Mila mentioned some of them that we'd like to look into to address this. So, Gary,
shall I take my screen down now? I want to keep looking at it.
No, well, why don't you keep it down, but keep it up in the background just in case. And we can see each other's faces. Thanks, Kevin.
So, Emily, what I was thinking, and this is after doing a lot of NEPA analysis in the Forest Service, so it may not all be all applicable, but you kind of look at the sideboards. What kind of interest is out there on the extremes? Like no development allowed, to hotels, condominiums, fast food restaurants, start out with a very low development side on the spectrum, and then go to what we think might be some of the proposals that people would come in with. And then kind of, if we're developing a questionnaire for the public to fill out with preferences, we could have a range that basically includes everything that we think is foreseeable.
Okay. So pull on specific uses and density of those uses potentially.
I guess my thought is, keeping in mind that we're doing this under a pretty compressed schedule, it might make sense that if we think there are certain, I don't know, management prescriptions or aspects of the zone that we think should be on the table, like visual screening, and thus in such a way, or developments that have actually been proposed, we could solicit public comment on those specific things as opposed to just getting sort of vague, mushy goals, things like that. I think just sort of, presenting people with, in a general way, with some things that we think might be the end result of this process, and getting their feedback on that early might be useful.
I think part of our issue is the zones are different, from grazing to range to a resort, and so we need to kind of see we need to group everything pretty much the same out there in the same type of zone, and so the expectations will be the same, I think.
I don't know if this is fair, but if I were to lay out some scenarios to people to see what they thought about, of course, I wouldn't do them very explicitly, but I would do some of the proposals that have been made, from camping to more kind of resort sorts of things, and certainly mention the potentials for hotels. So it seems like we do have to mention some things that are possible out there, and somehow get citizen gauge of, does that sound outrageous to them? Or does it sound like what they'd like to see?
Quantitatively, which is, I think, a useful start here, since we will have ample opportunity for qualitative feedback, qualitative conversation. One approach might be to have a question that outlines some of the constraints or the concerns for the area, and to say, here's 10 things, rate these 1 through 10 of things that you are most concerned about for this area, with, the first thing being the thing you're most concerned about, the 10th thing being the thing you're least concerned about. Those might include things like water availability, view shed, traffic, character of the area. So we may create that list and, offer that up. I think having sort of polar extremes of, here's no development, here's development with hotels, here's something in the middle, like where might you find yourself more comfortable? Where might you be uncomfortable? And Bob, I like the idea of giving specific examples that speak to the different types of approaches we've seen proposed, the character of different types of applications that we've seen in the area, to ask a question of, how likely would you be, based on your priorities, to support this sort of development, from not at all likely to very likely, and then as well as have some qualitative open questions towards the end. How does that general framing sound to us? Kevin?
I mean, the list that you started out in the beginning sounds good to me, though I think ranking them 1 through 10 is maybe not the most useful thing. I'd rather for each one individually rate it from not important at all to very important or something like that.
Okay. Going off of that list I started, do you want to just shout out some of what are the things that we are concerned about? We've heard concern, like water availability is something that has come up. View shed is something that's come up. What else?
Yeah, but I think view shed, view shed is since it's a big one, we might try to break it down into more specific things like, you know, buildings and campsites visible from the highway or not, or, you know, do we care about colors? You know, what, I don't know. I mean, I'm not coming up with good ideas right now, but I imagine that sort of view shed issues are going to be a big part of this. And so it might be worth asking some more focused questions about that.
So give me your bad ideas then. So we've got care about colors, visible, so buildings and
colors. I guess density, like, you know, should we control the density of building in order to protect things? You know, there's the architectural standards that are in the OA things right now about, you know, length of facade and height restrictions, all that stuff. We might want to make distinctions based on just topographic screening. Like, you know, I don't think it might not make sense to have a one size fits all standards for buildings if some of those buildings are kind of hard for people to see because they're back behind a little rise just near the highway, whereas other parcels are kind of below the highway, and no matter what they do, they're going to be very visible. So, you know, we could consider taking that into account. I think the city of Moab and their hotel regs had something similar where if you were uphill from the highway versus downhill from 191, there were different height restrictions being considered.
So let me pose an idea back based off of what I'm hearing, combining what you said and what Garish said. So Garish, I love your idea of having these sort of polar extremes. And Kevin, I think you're right to break things out and ask them to look at them individually. So for example, if it were to be something along the lines of give an extreme 1, an extreme 2, what is the maximum degree you are comfortable with, or which of these represents the type of development you'd like to see? So instead of having like, I don't care about this versus I do care about that, give them those extremes and then the option of I don't care about this. So for example, you know, care about colors. I'd like to see everything have uniform color scheme down to the details, to I am not concerned about the aesthetic selection of building materials and colors. You know, traffic. I'm very concerned about traffic in this area and would like to see reduction. I'm not very concerned with traffic in this area. I mean, I don't want to go into too many details today, but what I'd love to end up with is just kind of a like rough version of the types of questions. So we may be able to either break out and have, you know, one or a couple of us rough draft these and get them back to the group so that we can try and finalize something and get it sent out soon. And you know, take some of the work ourselves. So
Emily, one thing that I've been mulling over is how to question people as to what they see the demand for any kind of services are out there. And, you know, we've had one proposal that was going to be drive-in fast food restaurants. And it would be good to find out if people feel like drive-through restaurants would be an important asset for that area, or if that's something that they wouldn't like to see. The same thing goes with hotels or overnight accommodation condominium type units. You know, is there a demand or a need for trying to move hotels out closer to the airport, or condominium units out there? You know, to get a feel for, we've basically got, with the exception of the dinosaur park and the gas station, and that's under canvas, we've pretty much got a blank slate that people could think about, you know, it would be really convenient if we had X near this intersection, or I don't want to see any more of the Y type. So if we could frame questions about, you know, here you got a blank slate and here's your palette, just start slapping stuff on it. Find out what the people really feel like would be beneficial as a gateway to Moab.
I wanted to make a comment about overnight accommodations. I'm assuming that we're not trying to, you know, supersede or rehash all the stuff we've been through on regulating OAs. And so when we ask about those in this area, I mean, maybe we should remind people that, you know, at the moment, you know, OAs can't be built anywhere in the county without a council vote. But at some time in the future, the council might start approving these things. Do you think is this one of the areas where, you know, should our very first campground, new campground, is this the great place for it to be up by 313? Or is that like one of the last places we should consider? But just remind people that, you know, probably the pace of overnight accommodations, new ones being built, is going to be pretty slow for the next few years. But you know, when and if that starts to grow again, is this a place where we want to see it? Rather than just, as opposed to just asking, do you think it's nice to have hotels out here or not? I mean, I think that would be a confusing question for people.
Got some citizen comment from the 7-year-old there. Yes, I think that's a great addition. Here's what I have so far. So a question asking for ranking importance for specific items. Natural constraints. So how concerned are you about these natural constraints to be itemized? Use and density. How likely are you to support specific uses? And being able to question for interest, concern around density of use, as well as leaving open questions saying, what is not in that area that you would like to see? Specifically asking the questions around, you know, how do you define that gateway to Moab? So even just asking that open question of, you know, what does a positive gateway to Moab look like? Reminding people of existing OAO process standards, and querying, you know, how likely are you to support, or how much would you like to see this use in this area, that use in the area, specific to different OAO uses, campgrounds, RVs, hotels, motels, overnight accommodations. I feel like this is a good start. So I'm just going to kind of be going like this because it's hard to have these conversations remotely. Do we feel like that's enough that somebody might feel comfortable taking and coming up with a rough draft of this question and bringing it back to the Planning Commission? Or are there additional comments around this question or set of questions that we want to dive into? Bob, I don't think I've heard you talk, and I don't know, Brian, if you have anything you want to contribute as well.
The only thing I'd add is, I don't know how, this isn't really a kind of gives us to a question. It's a little bit about density, how you make this area look like it's not strip development. And I guess that probably has to do a bit with a diversity of development. So it's not all of one thing going along. But of course, part of that gateway that's kind of nice is it's beautiful. So I had a friend visit some years ago, and she said, you know, you're coming along and then all of a sudden you drop down into this gorgeous Canyonlands country. And of course, it's actually nice coming out from the airport, but when you drop down into Moab, it's very beautiful. Now, part of that's going to be accomplished because there's not private land or Sitla land all the way along, but there's a long stretch of private and Sitla land, and I do worry about it looking like a strip.
So I captured that as aesthetic effects. So things like not looking like a strip development, that would be where we could question on view shed type concerns and that feel of entering the Moab Gateway.
Right.
Great.
Another type of question we might want to ask is to we could remind people what the current lighting ordinance is for dark night skies, and then ask, do those standards seem good enough for this area, or should we try to do something that's stronger? And similarly for other things in the code, just to give people some starting point. I guess, at the end of the day, we're going to come up with like a use table and some standards, and that's what it is. So the questions are, what kinds of things are allowed here, and when they are allowed, what kind of steps do they have to take, beyond the way we're already doing things in Spanish Valley,
I love the idea of starting with explanation, especially since, as Brian pointed out, we have different underlying zones there. And so even before some of these teeing up, there are these zones present in this area. For this particular question, the standards range from this to that. So keeping that in mind and then asking the question. I think that's great to tee things up. Would anyone like to take a stab at drafting this question or set of questions and bringing something back as a draft to the Planning Commission? Or I guess before I ask that, Mila, is this something staff would like to handle, or would you rather we leaned in to draft something first?
I think what might be helpful, and I don't know if you guys would be into this, was we could set up a Google Doc and everybody would be able to have access. And then we can maybe start that with the list of things that we've heard in this meeting, and draft kind of a rough outline and summary. And then if everyone had access to that, you could adjust or leave comments or edit as you like. I think that may be a little bit more efficient than trying to just work during the meetings. If maybe we have a little bit of work in between and then come back with a more detailed draft. But I don't know if everybody wants to do Google Docs, and if you don't, that's fine too.
So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I like the idea. That was all.
Great.
Gareth, you're on mute if you're talking.
I thought I did. I like that idea too, as long as it's clear that if people make changes, we can see what changes were made and see what the original looked like in track changes. I wonder if there is a concern about violating the open meetings law. If we are, at one time, we were advised not to even email each other. And in this day and age, it's really hard for anybody to do business without using technology. But we've worked on some letters together and some strategies, together. As long as we are clear that we are not in violation of open meetings law, I think it's a great idea if we go with staff's recommendation on how to at least get started with a document. I think that's the most efficient way to do it. Maybe more efficient than listening to us all blather on for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable comment, and I've been thinking about that too. I think as far as I'm concerned, and I'll ask Christina to make sure, but it seems to me like it would just be pretty similar to everybody sending in their comments and then us presenting them at the next meeting. So I would absolutely envision using track changes. And really it's just a format to collect those comments. And then, we would be presenting all of those changes in the summary of them at the next meeting. So I don't think it would be in violation, but I will ask Christina. The other option that we have is actually to provide a view-only link to the public. So, we could potentially do that as well, but I don't think we would need to do that outside the context of the meeting. So we could always do that afterwards if we need to, but I will check and make sure that that's okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if we collaborate on the draft questionnaire over Google, that's not a violation of the open meetings law. Nowhere close.
Great. Well, thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. Any other comments on this topic until we move on to the second big chunk for conversation for today?
I did have one comment. This is following up on some things that Brian and Emily said, but right now I think we have 3 zones in that area. There's range and grazing, and then there's highway commercial and resort special. But I think in terms of describing the existing situation, I think we should just focus on the resort special. That's a zone that was designed a few years ago for this very area. It represents what a previous planning commission thought was a good plan. I think the highway commercial out there is just kind of an anomaly, and hopefully as part of this process that will be rezoned to the to the new resort special zone. I'm assuming that's what we're working on. So I just think it might confuse people if we spend too much time talking about range and grazing, or unless we want to give people the chance to say that yes, they think the best use for this area is range and grazing, and we should just leave it that. And I don't know, one of the extreme options that Pierce was talking about.
Well, Kevin, I wonder if we should be kind of zone blind in the development of this plan. Zones can change. The majority of it is range and grazing. And if to design a plan that fits the area, and then, if resort special seems to fit well, our recommendation could be as part of the plan that, would say resort special with these sorts of constraints seem to work pretty well. But if we go into it with an existing zone in mind, I think we might miss some opportunities. So I'm just throwing that out, that for starters, why don't we just not consider the existing zones that the area encompasses and just go with come up with a plan that seems to fit best for the gateway.
Kevin, were you speaking specifically to how we frame questions, or are you looking across? Okay, yeah. So
yeah,
for the sake of
so in particular, if we say, one type of question, say, currently in the resort special zone, you've got this sort of color restriction on buildings, and we could ask people, do you like that, or do you think we should make it more restrictive or not? Rather than, as opposed to just asking people, what kind of restrictions should there be on building color? And giving them kind of a totally blank slate. I think we will get more useful comments if we give them some kind of starting point, like, this is how things will be managed out there if we do nothing. We just continue to rezone from range and grazing to resort special, which has been, the pattern over the last few years.
But so much of it, a lot of it, I think, is already in highway commercial, isn't it, Kevin?
Just one parcel, I think.
What is Canyonlands by Night?
Oh, but that's down by the river bridge that we're not talking about that area, I thought.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Canyonlands by Night.
Moab under canvas. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Moab under canvas is, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they crafted this resort special zone, but it didn't allow campgrounds, and someone wanted to do a campground, so they just made a highway commercial because that was the zone that allowed a campground. And so I'm hoping that, I think that I would propose that partial gets rezoned to the modified resort special zone that results in this process.
I think we're getting out over our skis here. So just to pull us back, certainly providing context to the community through a map of existing zoning, easy access, or even just embedded use tables to show the differences across those would be useful. at the county council meeting, it was brought up that there is this confusion between resort commercial and resort special that I think we should, regardless, just clean up, kind of outside, just because there's such nuanced difference between the two of those. But the rest of this, I think we can stand back and start to pull things together, you know, forming these questions, and then come back to those if we feel like there's major discrepancies or major differences on the commission about how we want to approach those questions. But I don't want to be getting into conversations about how certain parcels may or may not potentially be this or that during this conversation. I think we're not there yet. So, great. Any remaining comments outstanding? Otherwise, let's move on to starting to look at those use tables. Okay, so just to play back, Mila, thank you for the suggestion for Google Docs. I think that's great. You know, timing wise, just to put a pin in this, let's say we would like to get a recommendation to the county council by December 1st, a draft. I guess, is that way too unambitious or overly ambitious to start with, just from working backwards?
So I think it would be, if we want so the council will need to have a public hearing on it. Let's see if I have those meetings. So there is a council meeting on December 1st. So we could aim for that to be the public hearing with adoption on the 15th, if we wanted to give ourselves that much time, or we could aim for the November 17th council meeting and then December 1st for council adoption.
I think that's safe.
November 17th and then December 1st. Okay.
Yeah. So
then we need to have the planning commission meeting before the 17th. The notice would have to be on the 2nd. So we could do the 26th of October, I believe, could be the planning commission public hearing and recommendation, unless you want another meeting in between after public hearing to be able to make any adjustments. But I would imagine that we'd have a lot of public process in between, so it's up to you.
I think that sounds good, because if we pick that December 1st date for council, that gives us that buffer of one more meeting in the year if necessary, if we needed to shift everything back by 2 weeks. So let's plan for that timeline. Okay. So plan for planning commission public hearing and recommendation on the 26th of October.
Okay.
So,
okay, and then do you want to, let's see, so the 26th of October, so that month we would probably want to be refining our recommendations. So then we have September, August, and July pretty much, and then maybe the end of June as far as public engagement goes. That's about 3.5 months. So do we want to make something of a target for public engagement, you know, as far as timing or number of meetings? Want to aim for a public, an actual potential outdoor gathering meeting in September or August? You know, what are our kind of metrics that we want to aim for public engagement in this process?
Given the unknown around our lovely pandemic, I think let's try and set goals using a digital engagement. And if we have the option to have an in-person engagement, that's icing on the cake. And I think only adds opportunity for us to ensure that we are, you know, dusting every corner for public input. But I just don't feel comfortable planning around that, not knowing what might happen in 2 months.
Okay.
I also
So,
don't know what precedent was. When we did the OAO planning, it would be wonderful to know how many public hearings, in-person hearings, or different world, but how many of those engagements did we have, and just use that as the bar. I think that's kind of a fair baseline.
okay. So I know that some of that was also small stakeholder groups that staff ended up talking to quite a bit. And I wonder if that's something that possibly we could figure out what we want to do there. As far as, instead of just, so there's like the larger public engagement process as far as getting as many opinions as possibly can, just throwing it out there. And then there's also the more focused conversations with stakeholders. So, I would imagine we could certainly have conversations with property owners out there that have been very much engaged in the planning process for that area. If we have other specific stakeholders that any planning commissioners can identify, that would be great. And then staff can work on those meetings. I think one thing that I think we could probably pull off pretty easily is if we get a decent boundary drawn. And I would definitely ask the commissioners to think about that so that we can make that happen very soon. If we can get a good boundary drawn, we can put a page on the Grand County Planning and Zoning website, and we could have that be a landing page with the description and the survey and whatever information we want and the boundaries. And then all of our digital communications can point everybody straight there to give comments. So that's just a thought. And then, we could also hold some scheduled Zoom meetings. We could start to have, we can either have public engagement meetings outside of planning commission meetings, or if we have light agendas, we could always put it on as public hearings. Well, not hearings, but, soliciting comment. So anyway, those are just a few ideas. And, we do have some of our digital communication channels are certainly working a bit better now, which is great. Now that people are more used to that as process. And then I can look up and see, if we did any mailings or anything along those lines too, to catch some of the people that aren't quite so digital.
So with regard to the stakeholder groups, let's add a section to that Google Doc and just list out any stakeholder groups that we can think of. So we can just start that running list. Kevin, do you still have that parcel map open? Would you mind pulling that up? And while he's pulling that up, Garish, I see your hand. Do you want to speak up?
Oh, yeah. I would recommend that we not spend a lot of time with stakeholder groups. I know it was something that Zachariah spent quite a bit of time doing outreach and meeting with different groups for the overnight accommodations overlay process. But I don't know that we necessarily learned very much from that. It seemed like we got some numbers back. I'm against it, I'm for it, blah, blah, blah. But I think the more important or a more effective way of getting comment would be written comment. We solicit written comment, and we can reach out to different stakeholder groups and ask them to provide us direct comment on proposals and the scope and that sort of thing. But I don't know that we necessarily would want to task staff or ourselves to go out and try to meet with the Lions Club, the high school, the veterans, the senior citizens down, it just seems like that. To me, that seems like it would be a pretty ineffective way of getting information that we could get more efficiently by soliciting comment, written comment. I'm just throwing that out, just my opinion.
I think the only difference is that the stakeholder groups for the county-wide planning was a lot broader. the potential stakeholder groups that we might want to target here.
I don't think so. Well, I don't know how you can make that determination of what stakeholder group is important enough to solicit and which stakeholder group isn't. I think, there's always going to be a group or two that feels like they've been left out. And, it's a democratic process. And if we let it be, everybody has a fair share of providing comment. And we try to get the word out so people are aware that now's the time to provide input, that we've done our duty without over encumbering ourselves or staff with going out to the Lions Club and the Jeep Club and the consortium of campground owners. And
let's just do this. Let's create that list regardless, just to get a sense of everybody's head. If nothing else, it'll be a good gut check for us to make sure as we are getting written input that we are getting an accurate lay of the land of participation. And then we can figure out, what additional steps we might want to take to potentially engage to make sure that we get that breadth of input. So, yeah. So Kevin, thanks for pulling this up. So what I want to just quickly do, just because it would be helpful to try and get a general sense of boundaries for this evening. I want to propose something and just take a quick straw poll or see if anybody drastically disagrees with this. I'm going to try and annotate over this. I don't know if that'll work. So what I want to recommend is from the northern boundary of the airport to the Arches boundary, following down to the Arches boundary to where Arches hits 191, and then up the western edge, either half a mile to the west of the road or to the outer boundaries of any parcel that is adjacent to 191 in this corridor. So it would look, something like, I'm running out of space on my trackpad, something like that.
Oh, okay. So your line did not appear until you picked the pen up.
No? Oh, okay. But it does appear now. So it's this pink line here. So generally speaking, are we comfortable with that as a boundary? And if you're not comfortable, what specific recommendations to change it would you make?
Just to make sure I understood you correctly, the line on this side, on the west side of the highway, is either a parcel boundary or half mile, whichever is further.
Yeah.
And then in the canyon here, you're just going down until the park's adjacent to the highway. Is that?
Yeah, I don't know exactly where. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to go any further than that, really. So, or to the park entrance. Park entrance might be cleaner, but I don't know where that is exactly. I'm trying to find that.
Because it's federal land that's not likely to be disposed of, I don't think it matters too much.
Right.
Oops. Emily, I would say where you start going down the west side of the park boundary, when you get to a point where you're basically kind of at the same distance south as that parcel across the highway, you should cut it right across there. I think people will be confused about that big block of federal land that's, all the way down to the Arches section.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. The only thing is that there have been, we're all aware of the debates happening around ownership of federal land within our state's boundaries. And since we are having an opportunity to look at this holistically, do we want to draw the boundary to include that, not knowing what the future will look like some 10 years from now?
My sense is if federal ownership goes away, that we are going to be in a totally different planning mode. And I think we should just plan on the existing ownership pattern that we have rather than expand an area thinking that there's a possibility that federal ownership may change within the state of Utah. I think that's quite a leap of faith and very presumptuous of us.
All right. Well, in that case,
I would
Go ahead.
probably agree. And of course, I think if that happens, all of that land's going to have to get zoned anyway by the county, presuming that the state allows us to zone the land that the feds give to the state. So yeah, I'd probably agree with Garish on that.
okay. So I just redrew it there. So does that align more to what you're thinking, Garish? Granted,
No, I was thinking of cutting it straight across at the south end of that parcel, that larger block of private land. Yep, go straight, nope. Well, you could do that or just straight across to the park boundary.
okay.
Well, I just drew a line that I think is what Garish was saying. But unfortunately, it's yellow, so it doesn't show up.
If yours is in yellow, Kevin,
There's
I was
a-
thinking just cut it straight across, just so there's the one good block of land there. But if you want to go along the parcel boundaries, that's fine too.
Well,
That's-
to follow your
that's
logic, let's go with the parcel boundaries. I think it's easier and cleaner if we want to just cut out those blocks.
I like Emily's proposal, and I think I'm not too concerned about including federal land or not. I think what you've got on the screen right now, Emily, looks great. The only thing I would add is when we show people this map, we need to emphasize that we're not talking about bicycle trails and recreation in the backcountry. That's not what this plan is about. Because I think a lot of people look at this and they'll think of their favorite trails in that area and potential campgrounds on state sovereign land, which is,
Yeah, that's a great call out. All right. So my mother-in-law's from Florida. This looks like a little manatee. Let's go with our manatee. Cool. Am I the only one who sees it, perhaps?
Emily, will you, I definitely see the manatee. Will someone save that boundary for us?
Oh, I erased it. I will.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see it. We can recreate it.
we can recreate
but-
it. There's our guy.
No
All
worries.
right. Cool. So with that in mind,
I got a screenshot also that I can include in the minutes.
thank you. Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby.
Okay. So that was really helpful. So big check mark accomplished. Let's move on, shall we? Kevin, I think you're good to stop sharing. And thank you very much for having that in your back pocket. Okay. So, does anyone need a quick bio break before we move on to this next topic? Or are we good? 2 minutes, 3 minutes, are we good? Okay. Yes, awesome. Okay. So the second big topic item was to address the existing land use code, the code tables inconsistencies for redevelopment standards. So months ago, we started to go through, as we were creating the standards for new development under OAOs, we were going through the Excel spreadsheet, working with the city, looking at, does this seem like something that fits into what should be a standard versus this isn't? And we decided not to address redevelopment standards, right? So we have known this is something we want to come back to. This also relates potentially to cleaning up legal non-conforming uses in the county. So what Mila and I were talking about was actually just going through that and getting a quick show of hands or verbal vote for each kind of big chunk first, just to start. Yes, this is something that I think should apply to redevelopment. No, this is something that I don't think should apply to redevelopment. Maybe this is something that should apply to redevelopment. And once we've done that, ask what isn't here that we think should apply. Let's just get our piles to see where are there places of consensus, where are there places we know we need to spend more time and get clarification. And then we can start to break that down and say, do we want to deal with this next week, the week after, break this up into chunks, meeting by meeting, etc. So Kevin and Garish, I see you both have your hands.
yeah, I guess I think there's a more fundamental question that, for me at least, the answer to that question affects how I would answer your exercise on the use table. Or not, the regs. Are we going to be like permitting redevelopment, for anyone who satisfies these standards? So it's kind of an administrative thing, or is redeveloping kind of like amending your master plan, and so they're kind of on the same footing as people applying for new OAs? Because I think in the latter case, we don't have to be quite so careful, because these are all going to be legislative decisions. There's a chance for negotiation with county council if something unforeseen comes up. And if it's going to be something closer to like a redevelopment by right, everybody can expand 10%, then I think one has to be much more careful.
Garish.
I would have the same question about the need for us to spend a lot of time on redevelopment at this point that I had about overnight accommodations in residential zones that we discussed last week. So staff can maybe answer this, but are people banging on your door, coming in saying we want to redevelop, or what is, and I know it's come up in discussion many times, but I wonder what is driving the need or interest in redevelopment right now? I would say, just throw out that maybe looking at the existing standards for all the overnight accommodations might be more important. And I'll give you an example why. There is a restriction for, and I don't, not that I'm just picking on residential areas, but the restriction on the size of overnight accommodations in residential zones, I think is something like 50,000 square feet, or, it's just some humongous size limitation. And it might be best, it might be better use of our time if there's not a lot of people that are coming in clamoring for redevelopment guidance to go back through and review our existing code dealing with overnight accommodations and see what seems to make sense. So I'm just throwing that out.
So I can speak to the question about people coming in and asking. I really do think that our communication with the community was at least fairly loud and clear regarding the OAO standards, and it seems to me that it's pretty well known that redevelopment at the moment is not allowed. So, we aren't getting people coming in and, asking to be able to expand their campgrounds and then, surprise, you can't. Because I think that as far as I know, most of those campground owners know that they can't expand their campgrounds, and so they're not talking to us. I think that it is important to address this. We were originally, it should just be absolutely part and parcel of the OAO code as it is, and the only reason that we decided to put it down for the time being was because we had a deadline with which we had to meet to pass anything at all. So I do think that it would be a good idea if there is any consensus amongst the Planning Commission to be able to take this up somewhat sooner rather than later, if only because it is a gap in our code, and there's no guidance that we have to give anybody regarding expansion right now at all. And I think it would be very helpful. I know that, some people are interested, but, we aren't having conversations with anyone regarding plans because they know that they don't have any means to do that. So I don't necessarily know if demand is, demand from our office is a good metric.
So Mila,
Yeah.
I have a question, and is it possible for us to basically say, and what would staff think about it, that redevelopment is really a new request for, if they want additional overnight accommodations. It really is a request for overnight accommodations that goes to the council, and the council decides if redevelopment, and I don't know exactly how we'd phrase this, is the same number of units, essentially the same size, but just basically, upgrading the facilities, or they've gotten old, maybe that would be different, but it would seem like an easy solution to say that these redevelopment things were a legislative decision for the council. And it seems also fair to me if we're really gonna, if it really is a way of getting more overnight accommodations.
Right. So I think that's really one of the main questions for the Planning Commission is how do you want to treat these applications? I think it's reasonable, from both respects. You could treat them as completely new overnight accommodations applications, or you could have, some kind of parameters around what might be approvable at a lower level of scrutiny, and what might not need to meet all the standards. I think that, the concern originally was that with an existing building or campground or whatever it is, if you just want to expand 5 spots or a few rooms or something like that, meeting all of the standards would be, potentially near impossible if you are, working within existing structures or, the confines of whatever it is that's already on the ground. I think it's up to you and however it is that you want to do that. But those were the concerns, I believe, that were raised before in our previous discussion. And that's part of why we didn't end up having any kind of consensus. In addition, we did decide on that 60 bedroom and RV space limit. And so there was some question as far as, how many spaces or bedrooms would be allowed for redevelopment. Would it be dependent on how many you already have? Is there a certain percentage or number that would be allowable for expansions? Is it a one-time expansion? Is it based on acreage? There's a lot of options there. Or none. It's up to you, but I think having some kind of standards or guidance in place would be good.
And just a reminder of what we had set out to try and achieve based off of our last call using this time today. What questions are out there? What are the feelings around the existing new development standards? There's been conversation relative to how those apply. Kevin, your comment around, is this something that should go back as a new, I guess, a redrawing of a new master plan, right? Versus just additive. So what I think would be helpful, but Mila, correct me if maybe I'm off base here, is could we just get those questions out in the open and then have those, in the minutes that we can then go back and look at, so that our next meeting, if we can't do it on this meeting, that's fine. But what we want to start to do is just say, okay, we're going to need to answer this question first. So we're going to pick this up as a discussion item at this date meeting. And then after that, we know that we're going to be able to do this thing. So we're going to plan for that. And then to just start to block off some of the priorities so that we can be mindful about how we're using our time this year, especially if we want to, keep with the schedule we just set for ourselves related to the small area plan, because we know that this has been a priority for us and it's been a priority that's been raised with the council as well. So is it fair just to kind of take notes, get these questions out there, put aside the, straw polling, all that for today, and then just try and be able to go into our next meeting? I know we're going to have a long meeting, but at least if we have a list of items we're going to need to answer, we can say, this is the first priority we want to take off and say, we're going to do this on this date. Does that feel like a good?
Yeah, I think that would be super helpful if we could just work on identifying what those major concerns are. Is it a new application? Is it not? Is there going to be an allowable amount of expansion? Is there not? Whatever those are, we don't need to flesh out the details, but if we have those concerns outlined, then we have the questions, and then, we can work on the answers after that.
So I was going to say, I think the thing we need to discuss first are some of the things that Mila just mentioned. about whether this is going to be treated as a new application that can be, turned down or not, the same way new OA applications are now. And once that decision is out of the way, then I think, yes, we should definitely look at all those standards and see which of those, how they need to be adapted, to expansions. If you've got an old building that comes nowhere close to building meeting the standards and you add 5 new rooms, we need some flexibility there. But I do think the discussion should occur in that order. So.
Okay. Garish?
I just have a question. It seems like, and maybe I've got it all wrong, Mila, but it seems like it's the idea of campgrounds expanding their capacity seems to be driving this. I don't know that we have any hotels or condominium units that are overnight accommodations that, have a need or an interest, because they want to redevelop it because their facilities are old. Maybe some of them want to add more rooms or more spaces, but I think this is a more applicable discussion item for the city to take up because that's where the older hotels and motels are. So if it's just campgrounds that we're talking about, why don't we just limit the scope of the discussion to campgrounds to make, we can bite off a little bit of the apple at a time. I just don't see what the need is for, well, maybe they're B&B owners, Airbnb type owners that want to expand. And they're allowed to expand up to 50,000 square feet as it is. So I don't know that there's necessarily a problem there. But I would, if we can narrow down the scope a little bit, it would make it our discussions perhaps more focused.
Just to add to your list, Garish, we did have Colin Fryer come before us with a very specific proposal for expanding his compound on 128, and we basically said no because we just don't have a way of expanding now. So I get the feeling it's not just.
Thank you for reminding me. Thank you. I forgot about Colin.
So here are the concerns I've listed. So please, if I miss any, call them out. So will this be treated as a new legislative decision that can be turned down or not? Likely to be the first priority we need to tick off. What standards might apply and what might not? How should we approach non-conforming uses, specifically in residential zones, is a concern related to existing B&Bs in the county. What is the maximum number of rooms or sites that might be added under new redevelopment standards? What am I missing there from that list of questions? Brian and Bob, any other questions that come to mind for you?
I thought silence there meant you probably have the list right.
Just wanted to make sure you had a chance to participate since I can't see your face. Okay. We know we're going to have a really packed meeting for our next meeting. Would it be possible, or would it be asking too much of staff to provide in the packet just a sort of staff report on that first question, just so we know what's possible? Mm-hmm. So that if, we do have any conversations, somebody can bring them up during future discussion, or at least that way we have them to start to think about ahead of the next meeting to make sure we're scoping that conversation accurately.
Sure. Yeah, I can provide a summary of these questions, and then also the use or the design standards that we have for the current OAO in that spreadsheet format, if that would be helpful, so that we know what we're looking at.
Great. Okay. Thank you everyone for your patience with me trying to popcorn that conversation. It's hard remotely. I think that gets us as far as we either thought we'd go or as far as we can go for these two discussion items for today. So anything else related to those before we move on?
And Emily, Reed Pendleton has come into the waiting room a couple times. I know these are just planning commission discussions and you certainly don't need to accept public comment, but I just wanted you to know that he is.
I think we made it pretty clear at the top that we didn't, because this will involve public comment, and we did give that opportunity at the top for public comment. We will have additional opportunities for the public to comment on all of these. So I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Should we move on to future considerations? All right.
I'm sorry, I was eating a rice cake. One future consideration I have, and I put it in the email with the last meeting minutes, is just to remind all planning commissioners that because the open and public meeting training was canceled in person, that it is required that everyone do the online open public meeting training. And I included the links in that email with there's the open public meeting training is required every year. There's 2 other trainings that are required once per term. They're all available for free online, and please email me if you need those links sent again, or if you need any more information.
Abby, I have a question. In the past, when this has come up, I thought we decided that those other 2 trainings, like the ones that have to do with budgeting and that kind of stuff, don't apply to us because we don't do any of that.
I asked Mallory, who's the council administrator right now, and she said that those are required once per term, but not once per year. And I believe that's a state requirement, but I'll double check on that to make sure that's.
Yeah, I mean, like, because when it came up before, I think the junior staff, people like, it wasn't Mallory, but one of her predecessors is saying, yes, it's required, but then we called Ruth Dillon in the meeting and she said, no, it wasn't.
Oh, okay. I will look into that and email. Yeah, I had totally forgotten about that. Thanks for reminding me, Kevin. I'll look into that and confirm what exactly is absolutely required. But the open and public meeting training is required, and I've done it online before, and it really doesn't take very long. So definitely do the open and public meeting training, and I will get back to you, to everyone right away about those other trainings.
And my recollection is that it's only the open public meeting training that we have to do, nothing else. But
okay, yeah, I'll confirm that, definitely. Thanks, Kevin.
I wanted to say, Emily, that I found it really informative that you sent us out the kind of the results of how the council disposed of issues that have come before them that have also come before us. And I've been to a couple of San Juan County Planning Commission meetings, and they always do a summary similar to what you sent us by email, so that council members or commission members can kind of keep up with, you know, what the council eventually decided. And I would suggest that maybe we could make that part of our normal meeting, is like just a recap of any council decisions that are pertinent to recommendations that we have made.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that sounds great, Garish. I'll just add that to the agendas if that works
Okay.
for everybody, and we can just put it at the top of the meeting.
That would be great. It's difficult sometimes to find the minutes, you know, after the fact, and then go through the minutes to find out how particular issues were dispensed with. So that would be really helpful, and thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. Jaylyn, would you mind giving us an update, speaking of which, from the County Council? Jaylyn?
Okay, I got it. I was trying to go over last meeting's minutes to give you a good update. So first of all, let me just commend this group. I'm so impressed. You've taken messy topics with a lot of parameters, and you've made it into something that now looks more doable to me. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you so much. As far as updates, you got the update in the email about how the votes went for the 4 land use decisions. The thing I was just looking up is council administrator's report. Chris Baird has finally been able to get fund balance information from the 2019 budget. That has not been possible up until now because the auditors had to come and complete their audit before he could close out 2019. The good news is it's looking better than he had predicted. He's a conservative budgeter, which is a good thing. I like that a lot. But fund balances look better than he had predicted. But the bad thing is the taxes coming in, let's see, I guess it was March, was a little bit worse than predicted. However, you may recall that last, well, whatever the month is that we set the certified tax rate, we set quite a high tax rate, and then we were able to decrease that rate so that we would be collecting $1.2 million less than that tax rate would collect. Even with the COVID pandemic budget shortfalls, we decided as a council to not raise the tax rate back to where it was with the extra $1.2 million. So that's a good thing. It is an option, but that's not going to happen now because we decided not to do that, and you have to advertise and have a public hearing if you're going to do that. So that's good news. Let's see. Now that's the budget thing. I probably thoroughly confused everyone on that. Grand County Public Library will be doing a phased reopening. There are a lot of parameters they're working around, such as they'll have curbside pickup. So if you call ahead, or they may have an online system, they will bring books out to you to the car. They will only be able to allow about 20 people into the library at a time, and masks will be required. I do not know what day they are planning this. They may have already started. I don't know. I should have looked that up, but I imagine you can find that on the county website. There is a State Office of Tourism Co-op Marketing grant that the Travel Council wants to apply for. It involves $275,000 of transient room tax promotional money as match money, and then the state, if this grant is successful, the Utah Office of Tourism would provide an additional $275,000. So $500,000 in promotion. The target audience that they would be going after is the Austin and Chicago markets. That passed by a vote of 5 with 1 opposed. I believe that is about it from the last council meeting. We are all for a while there, it looked like the governor was going to move the whole state to green. The council submitted a letter of support for our health department's recommendations to allow Grande County to stay at yellow. And then with the huge spikes in new cases over the last week, the whole state's going to stay at yellow with, I think Salt Lake County is staying orange. There may be one other place, probably the reservation, San Juan County. That's all I have. Unless you have questions.
Jalen, of the 4 items that went before council that had come from the commission, putting aside the 4th, which it sounds like there may be another vote on that soon. I got the first part of the conversation of those, and then I had to leave and go cook dinner. So just the general tone, I am assuming based off of the conversation related to our letter at the top, was that these all just related to the lack of a plan. Did they all fail? Did any of them fail for lack of a motion? Did they all have a motion and fail on the vote? And was there any additional comment that would be helpful for us to know, whether it's, citizen letters that we could use in our scoping of this area, or just understanding how the council approached each of those 3 applications in front of them?
Well, I really feel like the 2 applications out, the 313, 191 interchange, I think they probably would have had a way better chance had there been a plan. So really the major driving factor of those failing, there was a motion on all 4 land use items. And I believe the outcome might be the same, but I think that they would have had a really good chance of passing had we had a plan that these developers could have developed by. As far as the KOA camp turning into or the OK Camp Park, applying the OAO to them, generally, I believe the outcome of the discussion is that it's probably not a good precedent to set. It's not a good use of the OAO. And also, it sounds like that developer is willing to go another route if that were denied, which it was denied. So I'm excited. I'm glad that he's trying to do employee housing. I think it's great. I do think there are other ways that he could do that. And I think that was probably the major driving factor there, is not the best use of an OAO. Did that answer?
Yes, thank you. All right. Before we adjourn, I just want to quickly bring up one more future consideration I forgot to raise. So we do have a vacancy on the commission. There has been at least one applicant. I know of one other person who is planning to get one in. I thought this weekend, next week, I don't know where they stand. So Kevin reached out to Zachariah and Mila and asked about this. And because of some confusion around noticing, the vacancy was re-noticed with a closing date of June 25th. The first meeting after that is July 13th, where we could have interviews. The question I have for this group is, would there be interest in having a emergency meeting, I guess, an additional meeting held on July 6th, strictly for the intent of interviewing candidates, so that that candidate could join us, that new member could join us on the July 13th meeting. So the 6th, obviously week of the 4th, is that something that there would be enough interest that we would want to do that, to move this up?
I really don't see that we can, I mean, I'm around for that meeting, but do we really need another meeting if it's just for one person? I'm not really sure. I have to run. I have to be somewhere at 6 also, so I need to drop off. So
Garish, you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I think the week of the 6th would be good, but I don't know that Monday the 6th, if people are going to be traveling for the 4th of July weekend, would be the best time. Maybe we could schedule an emergency meeting Tuesday or Wednesday of that week. That might work into people's schedules a little better, and the applicants would have an easier time making an interview.
Okay. So let's do this. If it closes on the 25th, Mila, if there is more than one applicant that ends up coming in by then, why don't we just start an email thread? And if we need to do something that week, it sounds like maybe there's some interest in doing that. If there's only the one applicant, we'll just have the interview, and I mean, they'll still need to be confirmed by the county council, but
Okay.
yeah.
I'll keep you posted if we get any more applicants, but we did renotice the paper and posted it on our Facebook site and on our Instagram, and you know, we're trying to get the word out, but so far we have only had that one applicant. So
I will send out an email to the commission, just seeing if there are dates that we could make it work. I hate to ask one applicant or whomever to wait multiple weeks, especially since we can do this digitally now. So I'll just send out an email and we'll see if we can get something on the schedule, even if it's for later in that week. Kevin?
Yeah, and I'm a little bit uncertain of my schedule, but I like your idea of trying to move this along a little more quickly and having I mean, it should be a pretty short meeting and not too much of an inconvenience, assuming we're in town.
And if we do have, if we have to do the interview during a regular meeting, after June 25th, the 4 to 5 o'clock time is a perfect time for us to get something like that taken care of before hearings start.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is just if it's possible, I would love to be able to have that interview and then allow them to get council approval prior to our meeting on the 13th or 15th or whatever it is. Just again, to not keep them waiting. I think with everything we have on our plates, the sooner we get this new person on and up to speed, the better we are all served. So, all right. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
See you all soon. Thank you.
thanks, Emily.
Cheers.